One of the most basic human urges or drives that we have is thirst. Everybody can relate to it because we've all had moments, especially if you can imagine a hot summer day when you're working outside and your head is beating and the sweat is flowing and you feel like you would give everything you own just for a glass of water at that point. Well, with that understanding of thirst that we can all relate to, we have this beautiful story of Jesus encountering the woman at the well. And thirst and water is at the heart of it all. And St. Augustine tells us that actually in this story, Jesus was thirsting for the faith of the woman. He desired to bring her to God. And so he goes about it. And the way that Jesus approached the woman is a wonderful model for us and an example for us of how we can go about bringing other people to the Lord. People that maybe we thirst for their souls. We want them to have the faith in the Lord that we do. And so we can learn from what Jesus did, how we can reach out to others. So let's look a little more closely at exactly what Jesus did in this gospel story. First of all, they entered Samaria. Now, Samaria, we have to remember, was kind of a second-class citizens area, according to the Jews. It was sandwiched in between Galilee in the north and Judea in the south. And the Samaritans who lived there were kind of a half-breed. They were half Israelite and half Assyrian. And the Jews looked down on them as second-class citizens. In fact, they would do nothing whatsoever with them. In fact, if they had any contact with them, they considered themselves defiled. They would never use any of their utensils or anything like that. So Jesus, the apostles go into the town, and Jesus is there alone at the well, and the woman comes up. And how does he start with her? He doesn't do what many of our or maybe what our first intention might be or thought, like many of the born-again Christians do, might turn to somebody and say, have you accepted the Lord Jesus as your Lord and Messiah today? Usually, I don't think that works very well. That's not the best way to approach the subject and try to bring people to Jesus. No, he starts with something very simple, something she can do right then and there. He simply says to her, give me a drink. And right away, he's got her, because she questions him. You're a Jew. How can you ask me, a Samaritan, and a woman for a drink? Because they don't use utensils together. And Jesus says to her, if only you had known who it was who was asking for you for a drink, you would have asked him, and he would have given you living water. Now, living water was an expression that they used to mean clear, fresh, running water. They didn't have much of that in Israel. It was largely a desert place, and a few places where they had springs in the north. And when the snows would melt from the mountains in the north of Israel in the springtime, they would have clean, fresh running water. But for most of the time, they had cisterns, wells they had dug where the rainwater would gather, and it would sit there. It's still water. It wasn't treated, and it would have dust, maybe even insects in it and everything. Not the cleanest of water, but it's all they had. So he says, he would have given you living water. Now, we understand living water to mean something spiritual, but she didn't. She's thinking very basically about drinking water. And we see right away, Jesus is up here and she's down here. They're on completely different planes as he's talking to her. And she's not getting what he's trying to tell her. So he says, anyone who drinks this water will be thirsty again. But the water I give will be like a well springing up within you to give you eternal water. And again, we know he's talking about something spiritual, but she's still thinking about drinking water. And she says to him, sir, give me this water so that I don't have to keep coming back here to draw water every day. And finally, Jesus bridges the gap and he says to her, go call your husband and come back here. And she says, I don't have a husband. And he says, you're right in saying you don't have a husband. The fact of the matter is you've had 5, and the one you're with now is not your husband. What you said is true. He points out her sin to her, and she acknowledges it. Now she realizes that Jesus is talking differently. And she goes, oh, sir, I can see you're a prophet. She changes the subject. She doesn't want to stay there dwelling on her sins. But now at least she realizes Jesus is on a different level, and she rises to his level and starts asking questions about where is the proper place to worship God, Samaria or in Jerusalem. And Jesus enters into this full conversation with her, which is probably summarized by St. John here. There was probably a lot more that they talked about. But eventually at the end, she says, I know the Messiah is coming and he'll tell us everything. And Jesus says, I am he, the one speaking to you. And she leaves her water jug and runs into the town excitedly, forgets the whole reason why she even came out to draw water, to go reach the people and try to bring them to Jesus. And she sees them and says, "Come and meet someone who told me everything I ever did. Could he not be the Messiah?" And she brings the people to Jesus for him to work on them. Now, in the meantime, the apostles come back and they've gotten the provisions and they say, "Oh, Lord, eat something." And he says that beautiful line, "I've had food to eat of which you do not know." And right again, he's up here, they're down here, and thinking, does somebody come and give him a sandwich or something? And he doesn't bring them through the steps because they've been with him longer. And he cuts right to the chase with them. And he says, "Doing my Father's will is the food that sustains me." And he says to them, look around you. The fields are shining for the harvest. There are so many people longing for what I have, and other people have prepared all of this work, and you're going to reap the profits of it. Look how blessed you are that all of this is going to be for you. And then finally, the people of the village come out. They meet Jesus. They're impressed by him. They ask him to stay with him for 2 days. And by the end, they say to the woman, "No longer does our faith rest on your testimony. We've seen for ourselves, and we have come to believe that this truly is the Messiah." And so what Jesus did on that woman and how she went to the people is a wonderful model for us of how we can bring other people to Jesus. And indeed, aren't the fields shining for the harvest for us today? Let's face it. How many times have you met people who have said, "Oh, the world is wonderful. Everything is fine the way it is"? No, everybody's complaining. Everything's horrible. Where is this world going? Where is our country headed? So many things out there, and there are so many people who are frustrated, who are lonely, who are hopeless, who are confused, who don't know where to go. And they're looking for truth. They're looking for real answers. And whether they know it or not, what they're looking for is Jesus. You and I know that. We know he is the truth, and he is the answer to their prayers. And all we have to do is bring it to them, help them see that Jesus is the answer, and the fields are right. People will say, "Well, you know what? Maybe that will work. Let me try him out." But of course, just mentioning Jesus to them, "Well, you know, Jesus is the answer. Why don't you come to church with me?" is probably not going to lead too many people there. No, we have to meet them where they are, and bring them to where we want them to be. So knowing what's in their minds, what they're concerned about. And sometimes people's biggest concern will be the hot topic issues, the things that we debate about. And some people who would even say, "Oh, I could never be a Catholic because the Catholic Church believes in this or that, and I could never accept that." And our temptation might be to start right then and there and talk with them about the hot topic issues. But I would recommend saying, no, tell the person, let's put those on the back burner for now. Okay, let's not look at them just yet. Let's look at the basics, our relationship with Jesus. Because once we establish that, understand what Jesus has come to do for us and what he wants us to do in following him, eventually as we come to know him, all of those issues will make sense. And the person might even discover on their own, "Oh, well, now it makes sense. I understand why the church teaches that's sinful, because it doesn't go with this or that Jesus is teaching." So bring them to that eventually, but not immediately. Bishop Barron has an excellent example of that. He talks about, talking about the basics of things. For example, you have somebody who wants to know about the game of baseball, doesn't know anything about it, and you want to explain baseball to them. He goes, "Well, you don't start by explaining to them the infield fly rule. Now, the infield fly rule is a rule that helps in certain situations, but that's not the starting point. That's something you would understand eventually when you know a lot more about the game of baseball." Same thing with our faith. Starting with the moral teachings is not the best way to start, but talking about the person of Jesus. And I recommend just telling them, this is what Jesus does for me. When I pray, when I go to church, he helps me with all the world's confusions. And even if you have an example to tell them, show them something simple, just like Jesus did with the woman at the well, saying, "Give me a drink." Meeting the people where they are, acknowledging that they're confused. They're looking for something. They're looking for an answer. And, little by little say to them, "Well, look, we've been looking at politics for so long. Are they giving us the answer? No. How about the sociologists? No. Well, there's all these other things we've tried. Have you tried God? Have you given Jesus a chance? Why don't you let him, give a chance? Talk to him, because this is what he does for me." And you don't have to have the answer to all of their questions. Just like the woman at the well, she went in to the people of the town, and she didn't go in with all of their questions answered. She only said, come and meet someone who told me everything I've ever done. Could he not be the Messiah? She said to them, this man has done something for me. Let him do something for you. And there's another element there that I think is important to realize the fullness of what's happening here. The fact that the woman went to the well at noon to draw water. Women didn't normally go out to the well at noon, the heat of the day. No, they would go early in the morning, at the start of the day, to have the water they need for all of their daily work. So the fact that the woman went out at noon when nobody else would be there is an indication that many of the great saints over the years have said that the woman may have been ostracized or shunned by the other people in the village, probably because of the 5 husbands she had and the man she's living with who is not her husband. And just her ability to talk about Jesus gave her the strength to talk to them, and they listened to her. And she brought them to Jesus, even though she had great sins herself. And sometimes we might look at ourselves and say, how could I possibly bring people to Jesus with all the sins that I commit in my life? Well, we don't have to be sinless, but only trying to find the Lord. And even with our own sins, we might say, okay, yes, I know I'm weak in these areas, but the Lord has done this for me, and he helps me deal with them. And when I commit a sin and I repent of it, I feel closer to him. And the fact that ultimately, by the end, the people are talking with the woman seems as if Jesus has brought reconciliation to a woman and through the people. That they were willing to overlook her sins and not shun her because of it. And maybe realize that we're all sinners together. We're all growing in holiness. None of us can possibly look on someone else and say, oh, that person's a sinner. How can that person possibly come to Jesus? That's what the Pharisees did. And we're going to see more of that next week. But know that the Lord acknowledges we're all sinners in need of him, and we help each other through our own sinfulness even to know the Lord. And so, my brothers and sisters, if you know somebody that, and we probably all do, maybe a family member or a good friend or somebody else that we're thirsting for their faith. We know they need what you and I have here in Jesus. Maybe they're Catholics who left the faith a long time ago and have stopped coming to church. Maybe they're people who are not Catholic, or people who are not even Christian, don't even know the Lord. But if you're thirsting for their faith, pray for them beforehand and ask the Lord to help you to know what to say when the opportunity presents itself to try to introduce Jesus into the topic. And little by little, bring them along and say to them, well, Jesus changed me. He did everything. When I pray, this is what he does for me. Why don't you come yourself and let him do for you what he does for me? And if we can do that, then indeed we will satisfy the thirst of many people. If we can do it for just one, how blessed we'll be. That St. James even tells us in his letter that the person who brings another person away from their sins will save his soul and cancel a multitude of his own sins. And hopefully we'll be able to bring people to the Lord who will say to us eventually, not only do I believe in God now because I see what he did for you, that it's made a difference in your life, but now I see for myself because Christ has done for me what he did for you, thanks to your invitation. And now I can say with you, I truly believe that Jesus is the Son of God. May Jesus Christ be praised, now and forever.